All right, we're live. Let's
Are
enjoy
you going
this
to play the
live
music?
stream. Oh no, let's not do the music this time.
Okay.
Whatever. Yeah, we just have fun here. All right. So last time we played around with having a little music and all of that, Roberta. But thank you for joining us, Roberta. How do you pronounce your last name? Is it Matuson?
Matchison.
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 Well, it's good to have you here, Roberta. Uh, we decided to talk about your article, and then you replied and said, "Hey, can I join you?" And absolutely, you can join us. So thank you.
Well, I hate to be left out of a good time.
We didn't promise a good time.
Oh, well, then I'm gone. It's Friday.
So, well, how about we start out with Roberta? You give a quick little overview of yourself and maybe how you want us to talk about the article, and then we'll kind of get into it and give a little overview to anyone who's on the stream listening, and we can just kind of go from there.
Sure. Thank you. Well, of the work that I do as an executive coach and as a consultant to organizations that are looking to attract and retain people is really what brought me to this subject that we're going to talk about today, which is how not to terminate people. When I saw the story of this young woman who had been let go in a very strange kind of way, it really struck me because I knew she wasn't alone. She was just maybe one of the few people who actually recorded the episode. And I was like, oh, this is way too good for me to just keep driving by, right? I'm going to stop and I'm going to highlight what's going on. I'm going to help my clients make sure that they're not the next viral video that you guys are watching.
And in this particular case, so what it is it's a woman who had been working at Cloudflare, and she filmed herself getting fired. She was put onto a call with HR, and it just kind of immediately goes downhill.
It does.
Yeah, and
And I think I can actually share this link if I post these. Oh, can't post
you
comments to LinkedIn.
can't do comments on LinkedIn. Sorry.
Okay, never mind.
But if anyone's interested in what we're talking about, the link is in the event description, so you can find it there. Or if you search for Roberta Matuson, oh, I just messed it.
It's okay. Matchison.
Matuson. Cloudflare Termination Masterclass on how not to terminate someone. So, in this masterclass, I think we saw a whole bunch of different things going wrong. The most obvious one was the fact that no one who had any actual relationship, like personal relationship with the person who was being fired, was in the call. And I guess the question is, how does that happen?
I think we need to bring the people from Cloudflame or whatever it's called on and ask them how this happens. It seems to me, I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney, where he used to fly around and just like fire people. That was his full-time job. It seems like we're back to that, where these terminations are becoming very common, and the fact that they're very impersonal and you're just a number, and we're going to just check off our box that we've had this conversation, and we're going to send you your termination letter, and we're going to turn off your email and turn off your computer remotely at the same time. So I think that's what we're seeing a lot of these days, which is absolutely insane, because at some point, these companies are going to need to restaff. And I don't know too many people right now that are saying, oh, yeah, this is a company I want to work for.
So, having had some view into these last set of tech layoffs, I can actually offer a little bit of perspective about how this happens. So my guess would be for Cloudflare and other large tech companies, people that are being let go for simply out of a PIP or something like that, a performance improvement plan, this is not the way that it would happen. I'm pretty confident that their manager would be there communicating these things. But this is part of as we saw in the video, this is part of one of the large mass layoffs, right?
No, it's not. It's
so
not.
I think it is.
No, their CEO responded.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where
So the
did he
cloud
respond?
in Twitter. So bit of information. So I did a little sleuthing to find some information about this. This was not one of the mass layoffs. It was very unclear because
Mhm.
she kind of asked, I think she even asked that question in the video, right?
Well,
Like,
and
am I
all of
being,
her peers were getting terminated as well.
not all of them.
Sure.
Various people were vocal. So according to the CEO, so this is what he posted on Twitter. We fired about 40 salespeople out of over 1,500 in our go-to-market org. That's a normal quarter. When we're doing performance management right, we can often tell within 3 months or less of a sales hire, even during the holidays, whether they're going to be successful or not. Sadly, we don't hire perfectly. We try to fire perfectly. In this case, clearly we were far from perfect. The video is painful for me to watch. Managers should always be involved. HR should be involved, but it shouldn't be outsourced to them. No employee should ever actually be surprised they weren't performing. And then it goes on. That's about half of it. But yeah,
Yeah.
apparently this is just
Ouch.
their standard procedure.
Okay,
Ouch.
well, sign me up if, I'm going to come work for you in 40%. I have a 40% chance I'm not going to be here in 3 months. Sign me up. And by the way, I'm sure when you hire me, you're probably not going to train me. So I'm going to have to figure this out myself in the first 90 days as well.
Yes, yeah, and that brings up in your article, Roberta, you had the thing about making sure you hire right so you don't have to do this. It seems
Exactly.
like their process is to hire loosely and fire early,
Mhm.
It's just bring
which
in bodies, right? We've got chairs to fill. Let's bring in the bodies and we're going to, shake it up and roll the dice, and some of them will be here and some of them won't. That's how it sounded to me, what you just read.
yeah,
Mhm. Well, I
yeah,
think that's the case for a lot of companies. It's really that. It's we don't need to take responsibility for hiring, and often we don't need to take responsibility for firing either, right? The employee assumes all of the risk of both the job and the end of the job.
Yeah, it's to me, when I look at the whole hiring landscape, we have so many people in these roles that have not been trained. They don't know what they're doing. I mean, I feel for them because they really don't know what they're doing. And I do a lot of training with my clients on how to, select for success, and, what you should be asking, and not just what you should be asking, but what you should be listening for and watching for, and how do you interpret this so that you can make a solid hiring decision. And, I have clients that are in job search mode who, are telling me like these horrific stories. And I just want to send everyone a copy of my book. So
So,
if anyone wants a copy of my book, Selecting for Success, they can reach out to me.
I was just
excellent.
going to ask if you could give us the title of your book. Cool. And I really like that in your article you mentioned the hiring part, because ostensibly it was an article about firing.
Right.
But I actually don't think we can talk intelligently about firing if we don't actually talk about the start of the process, the hiring. Um, One thing that I ask folks a lot as we talk about hiring correctly is I ask them, let's do the mental exercise. If you were never allowed to fire someone from your company, how would your hiring process and how would your training process and onboarding process change?
I love that. I'm going to steal that.
Take it away. Yeah, take it for sure. Because I think it really does, to your point, Roberta, when you mentioned, oh, well, they probably weren't onboarded and they probably weren't trained. That's absolutely right. And I think companies' training and onboarding departments and budgets would grow immensely if they realized, oh, I can't fire a person now, right? So now that they're here, I need to be able to get them to be adaptable and be able to change jobs and learn the job that I hired them for. And I think that that's a good mental way to think about if you're hiring correctly.
Yeah. I mean, I have a client in Korea, and you cannot fire people there. And it
Wow.
is like horrible, like what she has to go through when there's a poor hire made. I mean, it's just, you can stay there probably for, 3, 4 years,
Hmm.
maybe longer. It is pretty bad. But I agree with you. I think that if people weren't able to dismiss people so easily, they would take more care in who they hired.
Yeah, there is a tension in the hiring versus the the letting people go as well, because I've heard pushback against interview processes that go through a couple rounds to kind of make sure that we know who we're hiring and that they know what they're going to be joining, saying that that's not fair for the person that you're interviewing. On the other hand, it sounds like on this side, so there's a balance to be had here somewhere. Because on the other hand, on the employee side, well, you also want to know that you're not going to get fired immediately, or within a certain amount of time, or ever. And so how do we navigate that balance between the amount of time we spend in that time up front and that kind of like loyalty to not get rid of people?
Well, I don't think it's about time, I mean, you could be interviewing people and have 5 rounds of interviews, and if you don't know what the heck you're doing,
Well,
you're not going to get a better answer each time. And so there was an executive, I'm trying to remember the name of the company, Paul English. He started Big Trip, travel company. And yeah, look that up. Help me out. He actually figured out a way to hire people in 3 days or less. And I loved his process, and it really made a lot of sense to me. And, he selected the people he wanted to hire, and he personally called them, and he went to the Starbucks next to their office and asked them to meet him there. He didn't say, "Oh, you need to come to me." And he just made this process like efficient, and he knew what he was doing. And everyone, when he brought that person back to the organization, they all knew what their roles were. They were all making assessments. And within 3 days, he'd have an offer out.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty remarkable when, so I challenged one of my clients, to do that. I wrote an article about it, and he did pretty well. He made a pretty big hire in 10 days. So I was impressed. Like, this was a big hire for him. But it can be done, but it has to be done well.
Yeah. I think the key that you're talking about there is you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to know
Yes.
what that person will be doing so that you can communicate it to them.
Well, and
Yes.
here's a question I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on. Is I think that's at least in my view, Paul was the CEO, right? I just looked him up. It's Kayak, which
Yep.
Kayak, right.
I use a lot. I love
Thank
it.
you.
I'm sure they're a reasonably large company, more than like 10 people, certainly. But how do you go about scaling your hiring? So if you're a 5,000 person organization, your CEO can't meet with everybody at Starbucks. So how
No,
do you
but
go about
he
scaling
can
that process?
do well because he would teach people. And I don't know if he did that at Kayak, but he did it at another startup he had. And he also, you'll find this interesting. This startup was had something to do with, online using apps and everything. He drove for Uber for a number of months, and at the time, he was one of the first people that had a Tesla. So he would show up in his $100,000 Tesla to pick you up and give you a ride. It was pretty fascinating, the lengths that he has gone to build his business. So, but yeah, so how do you scale it, right? Well, first of all, whoever's at the top needs to do it right, because you can't expect people to do things that you don't know how to do. And then you have to make sure that the people under you have those skills, and then they train their people. So it really is a top-down approach, right?
It
Yeah,
has to be valued, and I think that's kind of part of it is that what you're saying is it has to be valued top down. They have to say, yes, you
Yes.
spending your time talking to those people and finding them and training your own managers and leads to do those interviews and know what they're looking for. And if in the kind of wash up or the get together at the end and you're talking about it and you realize that the person who's just doing the interview, you're not getting that sense that they actually understand what's going on. It's like, okay, let's now pull them back out. Let's get them some training. Let's do a kind of a postmortem on that interview process we just went through and figure out how we can get better at that again.
Right.
That
And
has to,
let's only have the people in the room who need to be there. Like, we don't have to wait for Bob to come back from his sabbatical, because Bob's working in accounting and this is a job in marketing, and the two will never meet.
yeah. The blocking yourself on obstacles that aren't really obstacles. That's a big thing.
Yeah. And, look, we see the jobs report, we see how many jobs are out there. And on the other hand, every day we see on LinkedIn and other places, people who have been applying to hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and they cannot get through these applicant tracking systems. They need to be blown up and destroyed. Like, we got to reinvent this whole system. So if you guys are in with me, we'll go on to Shark Tank, we'll propose something, and we'll make it happen.
It's a pen that reinvents hiring.
Exactly. I like that.
I'd love to touch on, so I was obviously wrong that this was not one of the mass layoffs.
It's what it seemed like. It is really what it seemed like. And I think that's one of the things that's most telling about it, is it really seemed like this is just a mass layoff of, we had to get rid of 10% of our staff, and I'm sorry, it's just we're grinding through it. No, I think when it turns out that's not what it was, to me, it completely changes any assessment at all.
Well, that's what he said. That wasn't like, that's his PR company. That's his PR person. When you are letting go of, whatever the percentage of your sales team is every quarter, and you have how many people, and that's like, you have 100 people and that's 40 people. I mean, it is a mass layoff. It's not one or two individuals, and it doesn't have to be 800 people or 1,000 to qualify as a mass layoff. So I'm going to give that one to you.
I mean, I think when I heard what the CEO said, if I take him at face value, it makes like the video even more jarring. But my initial reaction to the video was jarring enough. Because when I didn't know what the CEO's truth of the situation was, or what he stated the truth of the situation was. But I'd like to present to y'all, if y'all don't know how the tech layoffs went, I'd love to talk through it and see what y'all think about the whole process. So, these large companies, Google and Meta and Microsoft, when they're doing these layoffs, most of the time they're trying to cut some percentage of their operating staff due to money, right? They overhired, or they're trying to run lean, or whatever the case may be, but they're trying to get rid of a number of people. And you're right, Roberta, to your point, it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 5,000, it's a group of people you're getting rid of. What normally happens at these companies, and I've been through a couple of these at Uber, actually being the person who had to tell people they were being laid off. There's rumors that come out a month or two in advance. And everyone knows, hey, I think there's a layoff coming. And leadership will not say that there's a layoff coming. Universally, they will not say it. And so, we can talk about that. But let me get through the whole process, and we can decide where we want to dig in. So leadership will not say anything about that. And then everybody will just spend all of their time being like, I don't know, how are they going to pick? When is it going to happen? Oh, I think it's going to happen Wednesday because this showed up on my calendar. Oh, it didn't. Okay, maybe next Wednesday, or whatever the case may be. So that usually takes a month or two. And what's happening at the executive level there is they're actually trying to decide how they're going to implement these layoffs and who they're going to lay off, and on what timelines, and the severance packages and all of that sort of stuff. So the layoff decision's already been made, but they're not communicating it, right? And I think they would say they're not communicating it because they don't want to spawn worry or whatever. The second thing that happens is these layoffs are usually algorithmic, or they're very low in terms of manager participation. So because they have to lay off so many people, what they will do is they'll take sometimes they'll take, the previous 3 years of performance reviews, and they'll find the 10% lowest or whatever. Not people that were put on PIPs, but just the 10% lowest. Or their algorithm might be something around business area, combined with performance reviews, or something like that. Oops, I'm sorry. I should turn this off real quick. Often at Uber, I was part of a round where managers had input. What they got was they got a spreadsheet of people that were targeted already by this algorithm, and then you could kind of justify or not justify certain things, and then your comments would either be taken or they wouldn't. But that was one way. And then the other round that I was part of, the managers weren't part of it at all. It stopped, I think, at either the VP level, I think. And so the VPs knew everything, and the managers below them didn't know anything. So there were huge organizations of people that didn't know anything. So day of, managers didn't get to communicate because they knew nothing. Actually, in one layoff, managers did get to communicate, but there was nothing to communicate. other than to say, I'm sorry, right? And they couldn't talk about the algo because then nobody knows how the algorithm works. You were picked, but nobody knows why. And in the other case, managers weren't even part of it. It was an email that would go out that would say you're part of it. And then your manager would call you a few hours down the line as they work their way through their list and just say, I'm so sorry. So I'm curious to all of you, to the both of you, how do you think about like that process? And is there a better way to do this other than to say, well, we shouldn't do these mass layoffs?
This just breaks my heart. I mean, your story just reminds me of a story of a facility that was in my hometown, where they actually treated their layoff like almost like a birthday party. And everyone was invited into the conference room and they were asked to sit in certain seats. And then when the bell rang, so to speak, they were asked to pull out the envelope that was taped under their seat. And then they were told, do not open this envelope until you get home. And so they all went into the parking lot and opened their envelopes to see, and they found out, like, oh, I've just been fired. And it was like a birthday party, like, when, oh, the secret prize is under your seat. And and of course it made the headlines. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, whose idea was this? Insane. And this is the kind of insanity,
that kind of thing.
I don't know. It's heartless. And what you're saying is that, this algorithm is figuring out who's staying and who's going. I believe that there's a lot more to it. And that's why when I coach clients, I say to them, listen, it's all about relationships. It's all about managing up. It's all about managing your boss. It's all about being visible. And in today's hybrid workforce, those of you who are working from home and you're not visible, that you have to work twice as hard, maybe 3 times as hard. You need to get yourself into the office if you're within, 2-hour drive, at least, once a week or something. So you're known and you're not just a number. So, that's my advice for people who are listening, who are like, well, how do I avoid being picked by this thing that I've never met?
Well, I think that's challenging. Like I've heard stories, and they're not rare, of bosses of managers when it's their time to call the employee, to be like, I didn't know, and I'm really pissed because like you're really helpful and you're in charge of a really big initiative, right? And I don't know how I'm going to get this initiative done without you.
Yeah, but then that really
when decisions are made at leader levels where their organization sizes are in the thousands, that's not a that's not a personal thing, right? When you're cutting 200 out of your 1,000-person organization, I don't think anybody knows those 200 people or doesn't know those 200 people.
Well, the problem is with that manager, and I guarantee you that manager will not have a job after saying that, is that the employment lawyer who calls sends out a lawsuit to the company because you just told this 50-year-old woman that she's the best employee you've ever had, and now you're letting her go. So you got to be really careful on the management end not to set yourself up for, a conversation with your company's law firm.
Fair, yeah.
And for that, the companies, so I had to deal with layoffs once in the UK. And the UK has different employment law, and it all works very differently. But there's still interpretation and risk-taking from the companies about how they're going to handle it. And when I had to lay someone off, I was given a script from HR. And it was a 1-page script. And I was told, just read this. Don't say anything else. Just read this. At the end, she can ask questions, because it was a woman that I had to lay off. And but you don't get to say anything beyond what we've told you.
So, I just want today's viewers to know the reason why I am laughing here is like I have let people go and I have been laid off. And I have been laid off 1 minute after laying somebody else off. So like I get this, right? And I get the
Yeah.
pain and I get the suffering and I get how crazy all of this is. So it's not me just being glib going, that's so funny. It's like these are human lives.
Yeah.
People have, responsibilities. People have committed to their organizations. They've given them everything. And then this is the way they're transitioned out. So I want to be really clear on that a lot of this stuff is not okay. And it can be prevented.
Yeah.
Well, and what do you all think about the you get the call and then your access is shut off, or in some people's cases, your access is shut off at 3 a.m. with an email.
Right before you get the call.
Before you get the call. I feel like you remember, Andy, we talked about a storytelling episode where you talked about a wake, right? This wasn't in terms of layoffs, but in terms of a project cancellation. I think it's really
company
strange.
shutting down.
Right. I think it's really strange for a company to say, look, it wasn't anything about these people. These are great people. We want to help them find new jobs. We're laying them off. But, oh, by the way, you're never going to speak to them again. Like you have an hour, 2 hours, or 0 hours to speak to your colleagues that were laid off, and then you will never, ever, speak to them again.
Yeah.
Does anybody else think that's weird? Like, shouldn't it be something where everybody gets to gather and I don't know, you take a whole day off of the work for the entire company and the company mourns, with the people that are being let go?
I think that
Well,
would be
they are
the-
mourning. They are
Yeah.
mourning. That's the problem. I mean, they are mourning and they are not productive and they're worried that they're next. So they're
Right.
not going back to their desk going, oh, I'm going to work really hard.
No.
They're mourning.
Yeah, they are, right? And that's like when I had to do that, I know that my entire team around me, everyone was like, okay, what's going on? They weren't, no one of, even me, I wasn't really working that day.
Yeah.
And probably for the next few days. But I think to your point, Mon-Chaio, if it was a thing that we could just say, okay, we're going to talk about it, we're going to work through this, it probably would go much better. I do know also why a lot of companies do that, though. Why they say, hey, look, we're not going to tell you. Because they're afraid of what people will do. And sometimes, rightfully so, sometimes people will take action against the company while they still have that inside access. And so they're worried about that, what that person will do when they get angry, because it is a very emotional time.
Well, we're in this world of hybrid, but in my world, when there was no hybrid, I mean, you would do the perp walk, right? Somebody from security would be with you as you were walking your box out, and they would do it in the middle of the day, and they would do it on a Friday thinking, oh, this is great because, there's not going to be a lot of disruption. Meanwhile, there was no internet, so you couldn't start looking for a job on Friday. So, there hadn't been a lot of thought put into this. And from what you guys are describing and what I'm reading, there still isn't a lot of thought. And that's a shame. And again, we need to go on to Shark Tank and we need to fix this with the pen.
Well, I think one of the last questions I have for you, Roberta, is to your point of not a lot of thought. You've seen so many corporations and leaders and whatnot. Do you think that's driven by HR? Do you think it's driven by company leaders company lawyers who are telling people how to lay off to prevent lawsuits? Like, who is driving and creating these layoff processes for people?
It is not HR. In most cases, it is not, unless you are a Fortune 500 company and you have an extremely experienced VP, chief people officer, whatever. It is not HR. HR is just taking the marching orders and moving forward. It's usually, the executive team who has, met with the lawyers and they have, put together and tightened everything up. And they've looked at the numbers to make sure that, women and minorities aren't, skewing the numbers. They look at everything. And then that's why, as you were saying, Mon-Chaio, that it took so long to get the information because they're constantly crunching those numbers. They want to make sure that they're not going to have a lawsuit on their hands.
Yeah. I mean, so that might be the biggest problem, right? To such a humanistic process is being conducted by such non-human. I don't know what the word is, right? The people whose jobs are not to deal with humans every day, I guess, maybe.
I think it's whose jobs are to deal with the worst of humanity. is maybe a way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it.
But the crazy thing is this, the reason why people sue organizations is because they feel they've been wronged.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
all. Like if you have treated them in a way that's respectful and you are, you give them a package that's, really generous and you are authentic and you are compassionate, most of those people are not going to come back and sue you. It's when
yeah,
you treat them like they treated that young lady, like that she was trash and they were putting her out, overnight for pickup in the morning. That's when you have these problems. And I think that's the lesson that any employer who is watching today or watching the recording should walk away with.
yeah. So would you say that if you explain your situation and if you explain your reasoning and you explain the consequence that that means, is that kind of what would get it there? That
Yeah, and if you are honest and transparent with people early on, like instead of like being non-confrontational and, oh, I don't want to tell Andy he's not really doing a great job, like really sitting down with Andy and saying, hey, we got some areas here that you got to tighten up, and here's what I mean, and if you don't, here's what's going to happen. Point blank, rather than, well, if you don't fix these, maybe kind of like this might happen. I'm not really sure. Like if we were just honest with people, they're not having fun either. If they're not able to do their job, if they're not doing it well, it's not fun.
yeah,
So, having these conversations where you come together, and I write about this in my book, Can We Talk? 7 Principles of Managing Difficult Conversations at Work. It's like, let's have a difficult conversation and let's be transparent and honest. And then we might both decide, what doesn't feel right. Well, let's part ways.
yeah. Those are when I have had to do performance management with someone. That is often like the best outcome is working out. Like, look, this isn't going to work. Like the best choice here is that we decide to just split ways, and the person says, "Yeah, you're right. I
And
just
they go home
I
and
don't
they're
want to do it."
so relieved, because they wanted to get out of this job and they couldn't tell their partner, I'm quitting, no, you can't. We need the money. Like, they're so relieved.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've done our about 30 minutes discussion of your article and whatever it brings to mind. Um, do you have any last words that you want to go over, Roberta? You have a new book out, if I
I
recall
do.
correctly.
I
Yes.
do. The third edition of Suddenly in Charge, Managing Up, Managing Down, Succeeding All Around, is now open for pre-orders. I have a whole chapter in there on timeless tips for tactful terminations. And I would encourage your listeners to go on to Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever they buy their books, and grab a copy. I'm really excited. It's all new, revised. It's solid.
Excellent.
Exciting.
And Mon-Chaio, do you have any tips or tactics from our conversation that you want to summarize it into?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're not. I mean, we're tactics for tech leadership, but our live streams aren't really about tactics, right? They're
I
more
guess
about
so.
discussions.
Yeah, we'll just have
So
a
I
discussion.
think I think we can
We
just
can leave
leave
it
the
hanging.
discussion. But very much appreciate Roberta for coming on and writing the article. It really got us thinking. And when we were looking for something to discuss, we were like, "Ooh, this is timely and important." And it was great that you could join us.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me, and let's do it again.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to, yeah, point us to something else super interesting. We'll do it again.
Okay, I'm sure I'll have something next week. Thank you, guys.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, she dropped. All right. Oops, I forgot to